Hello everyone and welcome to the final build of my Kingdoms of Amalur trilogy. This is the Avenger, a versatile individual who will use every tool at their disposal to get the job done. In this video I'm playing the build as a Dokkulfar who worships the god of death, but you can play this build as any race and with any patron you choose. The only reason I'm playing this way is because those were the choices I made in my Kingdoms of Amalur in 2024 video, and I've just been using that same character for all of these builds, thanks to Amalur's respec system. As you should have already guessed, the destiny for this build is the Avenger. This is a tier 4 hybrid destiny, which will require 25 points in both might and finesse. For these initial builds, I made sure to go for lower tier destinies overall, so that it doesn't take too long for players to get to this point, but also still high enough that we have some fun abilities to play around with. The Avenger destiny comes with 4 different benefits, but they're all pretty similar and very straightforward, so we'll be covering all 4 at once. So what you're getting is 20% extra melee damage, 13% range damage, a 7% chance to critically hit, and a bonus 10% to all piercing damage. This is one of the most simple destinies to understand, as all it really means is that you're going to deal more damage. We'll lean into piercing damage in the equipment section, but that's as complex as it gets, so we can just move straight onto the abilities part. We're going to start out in the finesse tree with a frost trap ability. This lets you place an ice mine on the ground, which will detonate when enemies step on it. You're able to place a maximum of 4 of them, which tends to be plenty to turn a narrow walkway into a death pass. In case the base damage isn't enough to get the job done, we'll also be upgrading them with the Icy Explosion ability. I put a couple of points into this, adding an extra 15 damage to the mines, and also giving them a 25% chance to stun. Stunning enemies is such a useful ability, and this way it also means that if you get pounced on while laying a trap, you might just get lucky and be able to avoid attack due to this. Next up is Envenomed Edge, which is the first skill I have maxed out. This is a sustained ability, meaning it will eat up a quarter of our mana bar, but in return all our weapons are poisoned. A 15% chance to deal an extra 60 damage on every attack is pretty damn solid throughout most of the game. Keep in mind as well, the faster you're attacking, the easier it is to get this effect to stack up. Onto a skill where I typically only ever invest a single rank, Shadow Flare. According to the description, this allows you to weave a burst of shadow magic to wound and stagger enemies in an arc before you, but I've always thought of it as throwing dirt in your enemy's eyes. Of course, that's just the first attack. You can also follow up with a second attack of some thrown blades. While I don't often focus on these, as I find the initial stagger is the more useful thing here, it is worth noting that this second attack does piercing damage, which will be increased slightly thanks to our destiny. Moving on to our second maxed out ability, Longbow Mastery. This not only boosts the damage that your bow will be dishing out, but also increases the size of your quiver. Unlike in most other games, Kingdoms of Amalur doesn't make you stock up on arrows. Instead, they're a replenishing resource. Just wait a short amount of time and all your arrows will be restocked. The wait time is only a matter of seconds, but in a fight those seconds really count, so the bigger your quiver, the less of an issue that will become. Directly above this ability is another one which also increases quiver size. Draw Power's main effect is to boost the piercing damage of your longbows, which once again synergizes nicely with our chosen destiny. Well worth maxing out for that reason alone. The final finesse ability is Arrow Storm, which unlocks the ability to fire a volley of arrows from the sky. Hold down the block button and at the same time charge an arrow attack, and you'll send a rain of arrows forth from above. Most of the time anyway. Sometimes the game likes to send these arrows from the side and change everything into a slideshow. You'll no doubt see that happen a couple of times during this video, but besides this weird glitch, the skill is quite good. Time for the might skills, where I'm starting out with a max rank skillful defense. This will give us 30% damage mitigation while blocking with our shield, but the real reason I went to the highest rank was for the shield bash ability that gets unlocked. Bring up your shield, hold the interact button down, and you'll dash forward and smack the closest enemy with your shield, turning a defensive item into an offensive one. Up from this we have Hardy Constitution, which I've also maxed out. This will provide us with both a solid health boost and a good bit of elemental resistance to boot. While I wouldn't quite consider this character a tank, they do want to be able to survive in open combat, and this ability will really help with that. If things do go badly and you start losing in combat, then you'll have to hope that Adrenaline Surge will proc. With just a single point invested, this will give you a chance to restore health and get a temporary damage boost whenever you fall below 25% health. Unfortunately, because it is only a single rank I put in here, the chance is only 30%, but that's certainly better than nothing. This ability really should just be seen as a safety net. You don't want to ever have to rely on it, but if things go bad, it's there, and it might just save your life. The final ability which I only put a single point into is Harpoon. This will let you pull small enemies towards you and pull yourself towards large targets. It is such a handy ability for any character who likes to deal damage up close, plus it also does a little bit of damage when used. Not the most damage, but it all adds up. Next on the list is Longsword Mastery. With this maxed out, our close quarters weapon of choice will be something feared by any who come up against it. But if raw damage alone isn't good enough, then we can rely on Brutal Weaponry 1 to give us some flashy moves. With this ability we get a charge move with our sword, which lets us dash in towards the enemy and skewer them. Invest a couple of extra points here, and this attack will then deal some extra damage over time, and award bonus fate so that we can use Reckoning mode more often. And for the final ability, it's Brutal Weaponry 2. This gives us an attack we can use from a block position, and this one is particularly good from a defensive standpoint. Phantom Edge looks like a fairly regular sword slash, but it's done from a lower angle, meaning you can dodge under your opponent's attacks. If you're facing a foe who keeps wailing on your shield, this gives you the chance to fight back, without having to risk getting hit. Once again, the extra ranks add some damage over time, and bonus fate to the move. On to the equipment section now, and I'm starting off with the same sort of disclaimer I mentioned in my previous two builds. Kingdoms of Amalur has a very random loot system. Honestly, it's one of the only things I don't love about the game, as you can't really rely on sets and uniques, and instead have to just roll with what you find for the most part, especially if you want your gear to stay viable, because equipment also has levels. Long story short, just keep on switching out your gear as you play, with whatever is the best stuff you can find. I can't offer super specific recommendations, but I can at least tell you the general direction you should be heading. For weapons, you're going to start out with a longsword. This is your close combat weapon of choice, so you want something that can stack the damage up fast. It's a reasonably quick weapon to swing, and should deal piercing damage, meaning the boost from our destiny could be quite substantial. But if you spot your target from a distance, you'll want to use a longbow instead. This should also deal piercing damage and can be faster than the sword, but it really depends on how you use it. Arrows can be charged in order to deal bonus damage, but at a much slower fire rate. Or you can just fire them off one after another until your quiver is empty, which does deal brilliant DPS, but also uses up all your arrows real fast. Either way, you're going to want a bow which you can rely on while we walk the Phalanx. When it comes to armour, here you'll be using a mix of finesse and might pieces. Essentially a combination of both light and heavy armour. The thing that's really going to determine your choices are the random drops you get, and what effects they come with. You want to have good armour rating, which is normally going to be in heavy armour, but I often find that light armour has better effects. Try to strike a balance between these two if you can, but don't feel bad if you end up going all one way or the other. I ended up with all finesse pieces while making this video, simply because the heavy armour I came across didn't have drastically higher armour ratings, and came with worse bonuses than any of the light pieces. Plus, the pieces I did use look really cool together, which we all know is secretly the most important element to consider. Time to move on to the skills section, and unlike the past two builds, I truly don't believe there's any skills which are a must-grab for this character specifically. I mean, sure, get Detect Hidden, it's the best skill in the game and I love it, so obviously I'll recommend it. But apart from that, I think anything at all can work. If you want to craft equipment, then alchemy, blacksmithing and sagecraft will come in handy. Want to focus instead on looting or buying gear? Then you'll want dispelling, lockpicking and mercantile. Mercantile? I genuinely don't know. I'm breaking from script for a second. How would you pronounce it? And can you spell it out in a way that I'd understand in the comments? I don't know. Persuasion can be good for better dialogue choices, and stealth could be handy if you want to place frost traps closer to enemies. But like I say, you truly can pick whatever skills you want. I think if I made backstories for these builds and made them much more character focused rather than ability focused, then I'd have more to recommend. But I decided to skip backstories for this trilogy. Maybe if I make more Kingdoms of Amalur builds in the future that's something I can consider, let me know what you think in the comments, I'd be curious to know. For now though, it's time to move on with the build. The playstyle for this build is an interesting one, as you're a fairly versatile character. At long range you can use your bow to deal good damage. At close range your sword does just as good a job. Your abilities and bonus moves give you plenty of choices, at a variety of ranges and for various opponents, so I suppose it's really a case of what sort of fight you're going up against. When facing a horde of weaker foes, you ideally want to be able to use the Arrow Storm ability to take down several of them at once. Charge up shots from behind your shield, then when the targets get close, switch to your sword and finish them off. If up against a single large melee-based creature, I find it's best to lay down your traps, then start shooting them. Either you deal enough damage with your bow in order to take them down, or they get close, set off the traps, and give you the opportunity to cut them down with your blade. If you end up in more of an open fight where you weren't able to choose how things started, then I'd recommend using Shadow Flare to stagger anyone who is unrelenting in their attacks, and use your Harpoon in order to move around the battlefield with a bit more mobility. This is the only one of my builds so far which doesn't have access to Blink, meaning you can't just teleport to dart between enemies, and instead just have to roll out of the way of attacks. You really do have a tool for every situation, it's just a case of knowing which to use when, and being well practiced enough with them not to panic in the heat of the moment. What I would like to bring up is what I find the coolest element of the whole build. This is a character who lives in a world of magic, but doesn't really have any proper magic to them. When it comes to your abilities you can use, there's poison which you've applied to your weapons, traps you presumably prepared earlier and can set on the ground, and some dust and dirt to throw in your enemy's eyes, along with throwing knives as a follow-up, and then finally a harpoon, which is very clearly made of mundane materials. I always really enjoy characters who are limited to mundane abilities, but live within a world that's perforated with magic, as they can always be seen as somewhat of an underdog, even if they're incredibly powerful. Sure, you have many tools at your disposal and are a brilliant fighter, but it feels like you had to earn it at some point in your past, rather than just being blessed with innate magical abilities. You didn't get lucky, you had to work hard to get to this point, and it's clear for everyone to see. Maybe I should have done backstories for these builds. Oh well, too late now, as that's the trilogy over. That's right, I've made all 3 builds and you've watched them. Well, hopefully you've watched the other 2, but if not, you can do that now if you want to. If you enjoyed this one, please do leave a like. I pay attention to the number of likes my videos get, as it really helps me to know what does and doesn't resonate with the audience. If you have anything specific you want to share, please do so in the comments. And speaking of sharing, hey, feel free to share this video with others. I'm not sure where people share videos nowadays, but that'd be something else cool to know about, I guess. I'm rambling at this point, so let's try and wrap things up. As always, thanks for watching. Sarge out.